They'll probably start screaming.
No, I'll do it. They know they all see. No, I got more. And DJ will be done. So that should be in.
Second one. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Tonight's program is on Strouss's, Youngstown's dependable store. Strouss Hirschberg had a store in Salem, which many of you shopped at, some of you worked at, and I'm sure Tom will ask for a show of hands for who was involved. Thomas G. Wells Jr. wrote a book about Strouss's along with Michael Geltz. And there are some books. He is willing to sign any of the books that he wrote this evening. We have them for sale in the gift shop normally, but he brought some extra copies tonight. Strouss's was the shopping hub of the community, and he'll talk about the history that will surprise and delight anyone familiar with the store. He'll talk about memories, trends, and how the chain changed with the times. He has published also a dissertation on Catholic schools and urban education called Closing Chapters, and another book, The Classic Restaurants of Youngstown, which he also has available this evening, and he wrote that book with Gordon Morgan. Tom was a journalist for 10 years in the United States and overseas, and now researches and writes about local history. The Jewish History of Youngstown and the Steel Valley is his newest book, due out in September. We're still in, yeah, we have wood up here, so due out in September. So during refreshments, we're going to show a video clip. There was a movie done at the Salem Strouss's department store in 1950, and we're actually going to show that during our refreshment time. So we hope that all of you will be able to stay, and I want you to join me in welcoming Tom Welsh.
I made sure to ask Ginger for a glass of water because I had an experience a few years ago at the YSU English Festival. Midway through my talk, I had the worst case of cottonmouth I've ever had in my life in front of a group of middle school students. Talk about an unforgiving audience. So in any case, I understand there's going to be a film afterwards. Ginger mentioned that about Salem's experience with Strouss's department store. My book goes back to 1875, and one of the things that was most surprising about this project was the sheer longevity of the store, and also the fact that it involved an immigrant story that a lot of people found inspiring. Now, when most people think of Strouss's department store, especially the flagship store in downtown Youngstown, they tend to gravitate to three basic subjects. All of us, I'm sure, have some memory of the Strouss's malt. Okay? When you think about the flagship store in downtown Youngstown, most people think about the mezzanine. They also have some memories of the Thanksgiving Day Parade, which was usually involved Eleanor Scannell, who was the human resources, I guess well, they call them today, human resources director, who was Mrs. Claus every year in the Thanksgiving Day Parade. And one of the things we were able to do in the course of researching this project was we actually picked up artifacts from people who, for some reason or another, had them in their possession. We picked up one of the old charge plates from the 1940s. I don't know if anyone remembers those. And this one was actually in its original leather case. That was donated to the Mahoning Valley Historical Society. Through one of Eleanor Scannell's neighbors, we actually were able to secure the Mrs. Claus outfit that she wore for years in the Thanksgiving Day Parade. And that is now at the Mahoning Valley Historical Society, which collaborated on this project. You know, in the course of our research, we found things that were surprising. How many people have tried, I guess you could call the ersatz Strouss's malts, the ones that are out there, okay? Some of them are pretty good, but most people say they're a little different. They're a little different, and Richard Scarcella was one of the people that volunteered information that helped, you know, gave us some insight into why those malts were a little different. One of the factors is that we no longer have the kind of local farms we used to have. We oftentimes have eggs shipped from across the country. And so there's a real emphasis on homogenization. And when you homogenize eggs, there's a slight difference in the texture. So those original malts were made with raw eggs that were not homogenized And therefore you have that silky, mousse-like texture that no one seems to be able to approximate today. That's one of the things that we found in the course of our research. Again, though, those topics are part of our narrative, but we found that it was a much more complicated story that goes back to 1875. And that surprised a lot of people, because when people think of Strouss's in Youngstown, for instance, they look at that beautiful, neo-Renaissance building that sits near Central Square, which was built in 1926. But the history goes back quite a bit further. In fact, 1 year before that building opened, Strouss Hirschberg had already celebrated its 50th anniversary as a company. One of the things about that building that I should mention before I go on is that, especially for people who are interested in local history, is that apart from being a local landmark, that is a building that is of national significance. It was actually designed by the prestigious architectural firm of Starr and Van Vleck, which also designed the flagship store for Saks Fifth Avenue. So that's a real jewel here in the Tri-County area. The building was originally 6 stories high. It's now 8 stories. And its cream-colored facade stretched 118 feet along West Federal Street. The building had a state-of-the-art air conditioning unit, an intricate system of pneumatic tubes. How many people remember the pneumatic tubes? Okay. And a network of conveyor belts that ensured the swift delivery of products to customers. And I'm sure many of you benefited from the services that Strouss has provided here in Salem as well. On top of the building were 2 huge tanks that held together 35,000 gallons of water, which served the store's sprinkler system and also helped to cool its massive fur vault. And by the way, that fur vault was recently destroyed, and it took a heck of a lot of time to destroy it. That was in fact one of the contributions of, and it was done purposely as part of the remodeling of the building. But that was one of the contributions of Bernard Hirschberg, who brought to the partnership a real expertise in terms of fur. When the flagship opened on the afternoon of November 2nd, 1926, it was treated as a major civic event. And one of the things that we helped the Historical Society to piece together was the significance of some of the photographs in the collection. In other words, when a prominent citizen in the community dies, if we're lucky, relatives will show up at the local historical society with a box full of photographs and documents, but not always with a sense of the relevance of those photos. Okay, so a lot of them weren't labeled, and the historical society, among the many photographs they presented to us was a picture of Clarence Strouss. This is the son of the founder, Isaac Strouss, shaking the hand of Mayor Charles Scheibel in front of the store. And Charles Scheibel was handing him a wreath. A wreath. There we go. This is why I didn't go out. Wreath, not reef. Okay, in any case, there was an adjacent photo. A photo was in the same collection that showed a biplane circling Central Square. And actually those photos were very closely connected, because the municipal government was so excited about the opening of Strouss Department Store in 1926, they actually hired a commercial pilot to circle Central Square, drop a wreath in front of Strouss's department store, which was then retrieved, ideally would be retrieved by the mayor and presented to Clarence Strouss. Well, the photo opportunity was preserved, but it didn't go exactly as planned. Apparently the wreath got caught on a cornice of the building. A harried worker was sent up to retrieve it, and eventually they did have their photo opportunity. But again, this was, all those items were in the collection, but their significance wasn't fully understood. Now, as I mentioned, the story of Strouss's department store goes back much further than 1926. Indeed, 1 year before the grand opening, as I mentioned earlier, the company had celebrated its 50th anniversary on March 7th, 1925. More than 500 people gathered at the YMCA building in downtown Youngstown, which of course is still there, to mark the event. The guest of honor was the firm's elderly senior partner, Isaac Strouss, who was joined by his business associate, Bernard Hirschberg. Less than a month later, however, Isaac Strouss died of a massive stroke, and it would be left to his son Clarence Strouss Sr. To lead the company into its next phase of development. Now, a lot of people don't know, again, the origins of Strouss's department store, and it's very much, you really have to go back to the history of retail in the Youngstown area when tracking the store's development. One of the things about Isaac Strouss is he was part of the first wave of German Jewish immigrants that came to Youngstown in the 19th century. He had a distant cousin by the name of David Theobald. Isaac Strouss himself was born in a little town called Heinheim, Germany. And if you want to know how small and how obscure it was, try to Google it. Okay? In any case, when he came to the country, he spoke French, a smattering of French and German. He knew that he wanted to immigrate to America. He had some interest in retail, but he was fortunate to have a distant cousin in David Theobald, who was actually at the cutting edge of retail here in the Tri-County area. David Theobald was also born in Germany, and essentially his contribution to retail here in the area was that he was the first person to insist on one price. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to go overseas to Asia or the Near East and to haggle. Well, in the past, before David Theobald got here, you could have had that experience right here in the area. Essentially, we were kind of a pioneer community, a little bit rough and tumble. There really was almost a bartering system. There was haggling, bartering was very informal. People rarely had an opportunity to purchase the kinds of sophisticated goods that people did on the East Coast. David Theobald changed that. He would go on major buying trips in New York City. And it was on one of those trips that he scheduled to meet his teenage cousin, Isaac Strouss, who again spoke no English, and immediately enlisted his help on the buying trip, put him to initially kind of menial task, turning out the kerosene lamps at night, sweeping the floor. And really, his experience of learning English was almost entirely in the context of dealing with the public. And he became, as it turned out, a remarkable salesperson. In fact, David Theobald had so much confidence in his young cousin that in the 1870s, he made him the manager of the woolen shop in downtown Youngstown, an enterprise in which David Theobald had a major share. And by 1875, David Theobald had secured complete control of the company and agreed to sell it to Isaac Strouss, who at that time had formed a partnership with another Theobald employee, a young accountant by the name of Bernard Hirschberg, whose story was very, very different. Isaac Strouss had come over here alone. He was not someone who had a tremendous amount of formal education. Bernard Hirschberg actually came from a fairly wealthy family. He was valedictorian of his class in high school. He lived in Newcastle before coming to Youngstown, and he was someone who had a lot of developed interest. He was a musician. He was cantor at Congregation of Shalom. He was someone who had a life outside of the store. Isaac Strouss was very much driven and focused on the development of the retail store. And of course, his name is the one most closely associated with the store because as early as 1906, Bernard Hirschberg took a less active role in the company. In any case, they had 3 locations before deciding in 1918 to lease a large piece of real estate known as the Wick Block. And in the process of securing that block for their new department store, which was opened up a few years later, sometime after Isaac Strouss's death, they displaced a lot of entrepreneurs. One of them, by the way, was how many people are familiar with Harry Burt? Okay, yes, Harry Burt was, of course, is most closely associated with the Good Humor line of products. Harry Burt's first confectionery was actually, in the basic location of Strouss's department store as it was after 1926. So this was quite an undertaking. It involved lots of compensation and lots of planning. Now, by that time, Clarence Strouss was already playing a greater role in the company. He had a very exclusive education. He went to Culver Military Academy. And he also, like the first generation of Americans who have a little bit of money, developed an interest in horses. This is where anyone who's familiar with the Strouss family knows there was a tremendous interest in polo, in equestrian sports in general. And in any case, Clarence Strouss was actually one of the people who lobbied who secured the first set of rubber shoes for his horse, so that his horse could walk on the asphalt in Youngstown, Ohio. As I said, Isaac died shortly after the 50th anniversary of the company marked its 50th anniversary. Did not live to see the opening of the state-of-the-art store near the Central Square. He left a tremendous legacy, though. I mean, many of the policies that Isaac Strouss established in terms of customer relations, in terms of how employees were treated, became, very much emblematic of Strouss Department Store. He was the consummate salesman. In fact, how many people remember Esther Hamilton? Okay, Esther Hamilton wrote a column shortly after Isaac Strouss's death, in which she described how a rude customer burst into Strouss's department store. This was, downtown, and basically asked where the linen department was. And she approached a very unassuming elderly man. Right, of course, and I guess bullied and harassed him, and he very patiently, and it was just with exquisite manners, showed her everything she would want to see. And she eventually left after purchasing $200 worth of linens, okay? And of course that gentleman was Isaac Strouss. So his devotion to customer service became a big part of his legacy to the store. Of course, the store that Clarence Strouss took over he was in a much different position than his father. His father built a business at a time when Youngstown was growing so quickly that in 1930, this is shortly after the Depression, as late as 1930, it was predicted that if Youngstown continued to grow at its current rate, it would have 500,000 people by 1950. Okay, as we know, that didn't happen. Okay, the Depression slowed the growth of many communities across the United States: Cleveland, Youngstown, Akron, and so he basically took control of a company that was at that point struggling. Before the Depression, Strouss has had 3 stores in Pontiac, Michigan, Flint, Michigan, and Newcastle, Pennsylvania. That is 3 stores out of his Youngstown operations. And there is evidence that Clarence Strouss had plans to turn this into a regional, if not a national, phenomenon. But of course, with the Depression, they found themselves in a position where they really had to maintain the business rather than grow it for a good deal of time. Now, he gained the affection of a lot of his employees because, unlike many employers after the Wall Street crash, he didn't fire his workers. He asked them to be patient with salary reductions. He kept workers on the roll at all costs. Even before Clarence Strouss took over, the store was known for its progressive policies in terms of how it treated its employees. It offered employee insurance as early as 1925. According to the terms of the Isaac Strouss Memorial Fund, the Isaac Strouss Memorial Fund, rather, enabled workers who had become ill to get some kind of compensation. Workers were also invited to become shareholders in the company. So this was truly progressive for the 1920s. Clarence Strouss was also a civic leader. And as Ginger mentioned, one of the projects I'm working on right now, in fact, I kind of was working on it until about 2 hours ago, is the history of the local Jewish community. And the Strouss family is, of course, plays a very prominent role in that history. Clarence Strouss was actually the founding president of the Youngstown, what is now the Youngstown Area Jewish Federation. He was deeply respected as a philanthropist. He was, how many people remember how beautifully decorated the downtown was during the holidays. Clarence Strouss was part of that, ensuring that during the holidays that the downtown was inviting. That didn't just happen. He was known for his work with orphans. He often played Santa Claus for local orphanages. He was also deeply concerned about developments in Europe. In fact, it was the oppressive policies of the Nazi regime that, in many respects, led to the development of the Federation, because there were so many people, approaching members of the local Jewish community about securing funds to help Europe's beleaguered Jewish community. That it was decided that it would be better to have one clearinghouse, that would enable people to make donations to the Federation, and that money would in turn be sent to various worthy organizations. In any case, after World War II, Strouss has went into growth mode. That's really, I think, when Salem becomes part of the story. Because after World War II, we see Strouss is developing branches in Liberty, Warren, Salem, and Sharon. And this is one of the things that makes Strouss's department store so unique. That while they were very aware of the trend of suburbanization, they also maintained a strong commitment to the city. Strouss's was actually the last store to leave Youngstown, Ohio, as many of you know. One of the things many people aren't as aware of, though, is that while the Strouss family did so much to shape the corporate culture of Strouss's, and by 1947, the store was no longer in local hands. How many people knew that? Some people did. The May Company, exactly. Okay. And this was a decision that Clarence Strouss made sometime before his death in 1947. And it was based on his awareness of the fact that his children were not as interested in taking over the business. And so in an effort to preserve it, he negotiated with the May Company to secure, so that Strouss's could become a division of this, of the May Company. And the reason so many people were unaware of that development is that the May Company did as much as possible to maintain the character of the store. And to give you a good example of what I'm talking about, Isaac Strouss's commitment to company to customer service was reflected in policies. There you are, Ginger. Was reflected in policies that almost erred on the side of indulgence to the customer. During the course of doing our research, we talked to employees of Strouss's department store who said that people would purchase wine glasses, and then they would return them the next day. And I'm saying, sorry, we don't need these, and they would find wine at the bottom of the glasses. Okay, okay. You would have even pricier purchases, like wedding dresses that were clearly worn for a ceremony, being returned and the customer receiving a full refund. And so essentially, and that goes back to the earliest days of the company. They really bent over backwards to provide their customers with the best service imaginable. Their commitment to the welfare of employees remained a constant. How many people, I don't know how many people have the experience of working for, modern chain stores. I mean, when I was in college, I know that I worked for Target or something like that, okay? And our employee lounge was essentially a card table and a row of vending machines, okay? Now, if people worked at the store downtown, the employee lounge had subdued lighting, magazines, and Barca loungers. Okay. Okay, the cafeteria, no one complained about the food. The quality of food at the cafeteria was comparable to what you might find at the Strouss's Grill, or later the Western Reserve Room. Now again, I was talking earlier about the commitment to the downtown, and that was reflected in the fact that even with the development of shopping plazas, with the development of the malls, of course with Eastwood and the Southern Park Mall, that Strouss's was very involved in strategies to preserve the downtown. Unfortunately, none of those strategies worked as well as people hoped. As late as 1968, or as early as 1968, I should say, an economic planner from Indiana University addressed a group of tradespeople downtown at the Mural Room and talked to them about some of the challenges facing downtown Youngstown, which were hardly unique at that time. Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, cities all over the country were dealing with the problem of declining retail and entertainment centers, okay, and what we might call urban sprawl, suburbanization, whatever you want to call it. In any case, he also warned them that all the strategies that have been employed in those cities had only a minimal effect. Whether that was slanted parking, the building of downtown shopping malls, the introduction of shuttle bus routes, all of those things which of course we saw tried in Youngstown. And, but in any case, as a reflection of how committed Strouss's department store was to the downtown, they were deeply involved in the effort to revitalize Youngstown by developing the Federal Plaza, and that happened, the groundbreaking ceremony took place in 1973. In fact, the CEO of Strouss's, Fred Grondroll, was the keynote speaker at that event. Unfortunately, trends in the retail market worked against Strouss's. And part of that was the result of a new phenomenon that occurred within retail that was largely a product of the rise of shopping malls, and that was what you call sale per square foot, okay? In other words, in the past, there was this effort to entice the shopper. You know, Strouss's had 6 floors when it opened. Eventually, it developed 8 floors. Okay, the whole idea of a lot of people remember those wonderful displays, which were not there to for no reason. They were there to attract, to titillate shoppers, to bring them in. And in a day when pedestrian traffic accounted for much of the traffic downtown, they were quite useful. But in many ways, the old flagship department store became redundant. And as that happened, you saw most of the best merchandise at the Eastwood Mall, the Southern Park Mall. You gradually saw the decline of downtown to the point that if you went downtown to shop, you were going to Strouss's and nowhere else. And finally, the May Company decided that they were going to merge, a kind of a terminating merger of Strouss's with Kaufmann's. And at that point, there was also a decision to close the flagship store. One of the many people I interviewed for this project, or that Mike and I interviewed, was Mary Ann Senedak, who was actually the last person to turn out the lights in Strouss's department store. Now, one of the things that was nice about the timing of this book was that, because so many of the books about this area tend to be elegiac. You know, we're talking about wonderful institutions that are no longer with us. One of the things that was kind of gratifying, though, is that the building is still there. The building is still there, and at the time the book came out, I believe the Youngstown Morning Business Journal came out with an article indicating that not only is it open, but there is 70% retail. It has rather 70% occupancy and limited retail. And so all those are positive trends. In the years since the book appeared, of course, Youngstown
Rewind.
are you?
You in it?
Pretty good.
I just turn around and see if you were pointing to yourself. He's going to show it again.
Oh, it is. I'll have to watch it. Yeah, somebody